Silver, did you check it? Hello?
Yeah, sure, Venkat. Have you sent again?
Actually, I already sent it. If you want, I can resend it. It's not the problem.
Could you please send? Already I have sent, so I didn't get any email.
Oh, really? Then I can send. Then I can send it. And I have sent it today afternoon my time around 12:20. Maybe it is for you like 10:15 or 10 kind of thing.
It's in dropped or otherwise is there?
It's actually dropped. So, Narasimha, did you receive yesterday's recording?
No, Venkat, I don't think you sent. No, Venkat, I didn't receive.
Oh, really? Okay, let me send it. Okay. So, as part of today's class, we are going to start preference determination process in the risk management. So as of now, we have completed compliance management, customs management. These are the two major modules, two biggest modules of SAP GTS, which occupies almost 80% of the syllabus. The compliance management and the customs management occupies close to 80% of the syllabus, and we have two more small modules. Those are risk management. I started the recording, Nelson. I already started. So the two other modules are the risk management. Risk management is one of the submodule of SAP GTS. So which consists two different application areas. So as you know that as part of compliance management, we have covered close to 4 application areas. Those are embargo, SPL screening, legal control, import and export, and also we have covered product classification, so which is related to the compliance management and the customs management. And then as part of customs management, we have discussed about customs export declarations, customs import declarations, trade document services, and the communication process, and also we have discussed about defining the default data procedures, and finally we have discussed about incompletion control settings. These are the 6 different application areas what we have discussed as part of the customs management. So now the rest of the application areas, the rest of the submodules and their application areas are, there are two more submodules of SAP GTS. Those two modules are very small modules. Especially electronic compliance reporting is very small module, and the risk management is like little bigger than electronic compliance reporting. And as I already informed you that electronic compliance reporting, is it having any submodules? Sorry, is that electronic compliance reporting was having any application areas in it? The 4th module of SAP GTS, that is electronic compliance reporting, is it having any sub application areas or the subdivisions in it? No, it is not having any sub application areas or the sub parts. It is not having any. It is not divided into any other further application areas, because the fourth module, that is electronic compliance reporting, it itself, the fourth module, that is electronic compliance reporting, it itself is an application area, and it itself is a submodule. So the last one is the electronic compliance reporting. It is very small module, and it itself is an application area, and also it itself has a submodule of SAP GTS. That is the fourth module. So which was specially designed for the European Union. The fourth module of SAP GTS, that is electronic compliance reporting, was specially designed for the European Union, and this was available from the version SAP GTS version 7.2 version onwards. If you look at earlier versions of SAP GTS like GTS 1, GTS 2, GTS 3 or GTS 7, those versions were not having this submodule because it was introduced after 7.2 version of SAP GTS. So this we will discuss next week. And before this, we have to discuss one more module, that is the risk management. So as of now, we have discussed about compliance management, that is sanction party screening, embargo, legal control, import and export, product classification, and the customs export declarations and the customs import declarations, trade document services, communication process, that is communication with the customs authorities, and incompletion control settings, defining the default data process. And then the rest of the two submodules are risk management, which is divided into two application areas, and the last one is the electronic compliance reporting. So when it comes to the risk management, as part of our course, we will discuss about two application areas. Those two application areas are preference processing and letter of credit. Preference processing and letter of credit. But when you look at SAP, SAP syllabus, and you look at SAP help or whatever it is, you can see one more application area. You can see one more application area in the risk management. So you can see one more application area in the risk management. Can anyone tell me what is that application area? There are actually there are three application areas in the risk management. Actually, there are three application areas in the risk management. Those three application areas are preference processing, letter of credit, and what is the third application area? Can anyone tell me? Can anyone is having any idea? SAP. Anybody knows? So that is restitution. There is another application area. Basically, the risk management have been divided into three application areas. Those three application areas are preference processing, letter of credit, and restitution. So the reason for not considering that restitution in our as part of our course is that is the one of the application area which is having very least importance. Why? Because restitution is an application area. Restitution is an application area which was designed, which was introduced by SAP GTS, to support agricultural clients. Restitution is one of the application area which was introduced by the SAP GTS as part of risk management. It was specially introduced for the agricultural clients, and that too if the client is in the European Union. So if a client, if you want to use restitution, that the prerequisite is your client should be an agricultural client, and that too the client should be part of European Union. So because of this reason, what happens, like in general, no agricultural client is not having that much capability to put to face or to bear the expenses of GTS module, which is new dimensional module and which is little expensive than any other module. So generally, for your information, all the new dimensional module of new dimensional modules of SAP GTS are expensive, are more expensive than any core modules. So, and that too, agricultural clients may not be having that much huge revenues or whatever it is. So because of that reason, no client not considered, and even I heard somewhere SAP itself is trying to remove, or SAP itself is trying to take out the restitution from their regular contents, because uh, as of now they did not find the any client is implementing a restitution module for their business. That is the one reason. And also, if you look at any GTS requirements, if you come across any GTS requirement, whether it is in Europe, whether it is in US or wherever it is, in general, even since almost I have been working for SAP GTS close to 4.5, and also I started teaching SAP GTS close to 2+ years. But all this time I never seen any requirement. I never seen any requirement asking for should be expertise in the restitution. That's the reason I have not included that as part of our syllabus and as part of our course content. So basically what it does, restitution for information purpose. Restitution is an application area which will help the agricultural client to calculate the refund. Refund in the sense, in the European Union, if any client is exporting, or importing, or if any client is dealing with agricultural products as part of export or as part of import, the European Union countries authorities will give some kind of refund. The European Union clients or countries authorities would give some kind of refund back to the clients. If the client would like to calculate the refund based on their agricultural export or agricultural import, what they can do, they can implement restitution module. If an agricultural client implement restitution module to their business, so that will help them to identify the refund, that will help them to calculate the refund or to determine the refund for each and every export what they are making towards the agricultural products. So this is the requirement, this is the purpose of restitution module to any client, but it's not having any kind of importance because I never seen any requirement asking for the restitution almost all these days. Okay, so that is the third one actually, which we are not considering. Actually, I have one configuration guide related to that. I will just share it for information purpose. I can tell you one thing, at any point of time, even after 2 months or 3 months, at any point of time, if you come across any requirement where asking for that, definitely you can come back to me, then I can discuss, I can take a session for that, or I can spend some time to you to explain how it works. But as of now, I have not seen any kind of requirement for that, especially for that application area. But still I can forward the configuration guide related to that restitution. And also, if in case you happen to work on any European client which is agricultural and where you need to work on it, please let me know, then I can definitely provide support from my side in order to make you understand how it works. Okay, just for information purpose. In the future, if you come across that one, please let me know at any time. It's if it is after 1 month or 2 months or any time, whenever it is, I am fine with that. Okay. And coming to the other two application areas, what we will discuss, or those are preference determination and letter of credit processing. Preference processing or preference determination processing, or the letter of credit processing. So as part of today's class, we are going to start the application area called preference determination or preference processing. So before I start explaining this preference determination process, or some people call it as preference calculation, some people call it as preference determination, some people call it as preference identification, some people call it as preference determination, some people call it as preference determinations, or some people call it as preference amount, preference identification. So first of all, before I get into the further details, I need to explain the business background. Is everybody having the same problem? Like one of our team member is claiming that my voice is breaking. Is everybody feeling the same, or is it's only like Sridhar?
Quite clear. It's very clear.
Sridhar, can you please disconnect and connect again? Because then everybody is able to get my voice. They're not having any issues. Can you please disconnect and connect again?
Okay, sure, Venkat.
Okay. So here we need to know, I need to explain what is the business background, what is the business process, or what is the business background associated, what is the business background, or what is the business process associated with preference processing in the international trade. We need to know what is preference processing, or why do we need to identify the preference, or first of all, what is preference? What is meant by preference? So we need to know all these things before we understand our SAP preference processing. We need to understand about the business requirement or the business process. Okay. So basically, okay. Can anyone tell me what is NAFTA? What is NAFTA?
North America Free Trade Organization.
Okay. North American Free Trade Agreement. North American Free Trade Agreement. And what is EFTA? EFTA.
Something related to Europe trade.
European Free Trade Agreement. And what is the EU? EU. You know, I think everybody knows it. European Union. So like this, there is something called NAFTA, and there is also something called European Union or European Free Trade Agreement, and European Union, and also we have European Free Trade Agreement, and also we have something else called Central American Free Trade Agreement, CAFTA. So that means, what is the basic common terminology, common term involving all these like NAFTA or EFTA or CAFTA? The common thing is free trade agreement. Free trade agreement, or we call, or people call, these are actually the actual terminology is free trade agreements. Some people call them as a free trade zones. So that means all over the world, there are some free trade zones. There are some free trade zones between the countries, or there are some free trade agreements. There are some free trade agreements between the countries. We can call them as a free trade zone or free trade agreements. So now we need to know which countries or what kind of countries can establish this kind of free trade agreements. Okay, let me I mean to say that answer to my question that NAFTA, there is a free trade zone or the free trade agreement called NAFTA. So you know how many countries are participated in this NAFTA? How many countries are participated, or what are those countries participated in the NAFTA?
They're all neighboring countries. That's one clause, I think.
Very good. Very good.
Canada, US, and Mexico.
Correct. There are three countries. There are three countries which are part of NAFTA. Those are US, okay, US, Mexico, Canada. North American Free Trade Agreement. The countries which are part of this agreement or the countries which are part of this free trade zone are US, Canada, Mexico. And when you look at European Free Trade Agreement, so this is an agreement between three countries of Europe. I think France and Denmark and one more country is there. So that is the free trade zone between those countries, which was very, very old. That free trade agreement was very old. And you know that I think 10 years back, right? 10 or maybe 12 years back, when the European Union was established, it's recently, right? It's not quite long. The euro was established recently, right? Maybe like 10 to around 10 years, right? Okay. So that European Union was established. European Union is one of the free trade or one of the biggest free trade zone or one of the free trade agreement. European Union, EU, is one of the, it's like NAFTA, it's like EFTA, it's like CAFTA. It's also one of the free trade zone or the free trade agreement between 29 countries of Europe. 29 countries of Europe. So basically what happens, because
yeah, so when we say it's a free trade agreement or a free trade zone, what does it mean by free? Like,
I will come to that because I will come to that. Let me okay, let me complete the whole background. Okay, let me explain the whole background. Okay, so basically, so here we have a free trade agreement between three countries of North America: Canada, US and Mexico. So North America continent is having three countries. Those are Canada, Mexico and US. Those three countries forms a free trade zone between those, they establish a free trade zone between those three countries called NAFTA. And if you look at the Central American free trade countries, there are some free trade countries which establishes between Cuba and some other countries, they establish the free trade zone between them, that is called CAFTA. And when you look at Europe, there are 29 countries. There are 29 countries in the Europe which establishes 29 countries in the Europe like Greenland or Norway, Denmark, Germany, Poland, France, Austria. All these countries establishes a one more biggest free trade zone or one more biggest free trade agreement between 29 countries of Europe. So here, how can you define? If I want to define a free trade agreement, generally how can I define? A free trade agreement or the free trade zone is a zone which can be established between the countries which are geographically close to each other. A free trade agreement is an agreement which can be established. It's not mandatory, but in general, the countries which are geographically close to each other. That means in the Europe, all these countries are very close to each other. What they are doing, they come forward, all the countries in the Europe, they come forward, and what they did, they have established a free trade zone called European Union. And in a similar way, the Canada, United States and Mexico, these are the three countries, okay, which are geographically close to each other, and they establish a free trade zone called NAFTA. So that means what happens, the countries which are close to each other geographically, what they are doing, they are establishing free trade zones or the free trade agreements between them. So now we need to know, as raised by the Vikas, what is a free trade zone? So what kind of advantages, if countries have established a free trade zone, then what kind of advantages or what kind of benefits the clients in the zone will be getting. Now we will discuss that. So basically, and here I need to tell something else. these free trade zones are, there are two different kinds of free trade zones. Bilateral free trade agreements, there are two different kinds of free trade agreements. Those are bilateral agreements, bilateral agreements, or multilateral agreements. So that means if a free trade agreement, if a free trade agreement happens between the two countries, then we call it as a bilateral agreement. Or if a free trade agreement happens between multiple countries, more than two countries, then we call it as a multilateral free trade agreement. So this is for general information. But in general, in SAP perspective, our SAP has provided a pre-configured functionality to support two main free trade zones. That is, one is NAFTA. SAP GTS has provided pre-configured functionality to support NAFTA and to support the European Union. SAP has provided some pre-configured configurations in the system. Now we need to know, so what kind of advantages if US, Canada and Mexico establishes, free trade zone, what kind of advantages the clients will get? So basically here I need to tell one general thing. I think everybody knows, everybody might be knowing this. In general, in the worldwide, every country, as you know that every country would recommend or would give the preference to increase exports rather than the imports. Am I correct? All over the world, whether it is India or Europe or whatever, like US or whatever the country it is, the country would prefer have more exports than the imports. Why? If the country is doing more exports, generally what happens, the foreign reserves will increase and the economy will be whenever the foreign reserves will be more, generally the economy will be in a good condition. So that is like a very like basic fundamental thing, like in every country, whether even you, like when you are doing business as an individual, you would prefer to do the more exports to get the more money. In the similar way, when it comes to the macro level, at micro level, that is an independent concern level or independent firm level or independent company level, you would prefer to increase the revenues. And at the macro level, macro means at country level. So country level, the country would give the preference or country would encourage more exports than the imports. So that I think you might be knowing it. Here the problem is sorry. So generally what the countries does, what the countries consider whenever they come forward and establishes free trade zones between those countries, what they do, they would give the more preference, they would give the more benefit, or they would give the benefits to the clients. Let us say NAFTA. NAFTA is the agreement, North American Free Trade Agreement, is an agreement between Canada, US and Mexico. It is an agreement between these three countries. So here, what these three countries facilitate, what kind of facility or what kind of advantages they give to their clients, what they do, these countries, the Canadian authorities or US authorities or Mexican authorities would encourage their clients to do the imports from the same zone countries. The Canada would give the preference, or Canada would encourage their clients do the imports from the same free trade zone. So that means, let us say there is a company called GV Export and Imports in Canada. Let us say it is in Ontario state, like Toronto. In Toronto there is a company called GV Export and Import. So if they import something, if the GV Export or GV INC or GV Corporation import something from Mexico or US, then what happens? Canada would give some kind of preference. It can be tax exemption, or it can be some tax refund, or it can be exemption of excise duty, whatever it is. Whatever it is the form, the client who is giving the preference, the client in Canada who is giving the preference to import the raw materials or to import the semi-finished goods from the same free trade zone. If the client in Canada would give the preference to import the raw materials of the semi-finished goods from the same free trade zone, that is Mexico or US, then what happens? The client GB Export or ABC Corporation, whatever it is, will get the benefit from the Canadian authorities. But whereas if the same GB Export and Import or GB Corporation receives something from Germany, or receives something from the France, or receives something from the import something from the Libya, or like Egypt or whatever it is, then the Canadian government will not give any kind of preference. Why? These countries are not part of the same free trade zone. So that means whenever the countries establishes the free trade zone, they would prefer, they would recommend, they would suggest you do the more imports or do the imports from the same preference zones, so that we will give the benefits, so that we will give the tax exemption, or so that we will give the preference or refund or whatever it is. So this is what is happening in any free trade zone. In the similar way, as I already explained, in the European Union there are 29 countries. 29 countries in the European Union. So what happens? The 29 countries of Europe, what they do, if any client of these 29 countries, if they give the preference, if they would give the preference to the same countries, if they import the raw materials or semi-finished goods from the same free trade zone countries, then what happens? The respective country authorities would give some kind of exemption or some kind of refund or some kind of preference. So this is like what the business process exists. What is the business process? The business requirement or the business process exists. So for this, the clients in these free trade zones, okay, if they are doing 1 or 2 transactions per day or 1 transaction per day, maybe they can calculate the preference manually. Like when SAP GTS was not there, if any client after importing the raw materials, like when SAP GTS was not in the market, like 14 years back or 15 years back, when SAP GTS was not in the market, so the client, what they used to do, whenever they import something, they get some benefit, right? So they get some preference, right? In order to calculate that preference, in order to calculate that benefit, those days they used to depend on some third-party agencies. Who can calculate what is your preference for importing this from this country to this, or what is your preference value, or what is your tax exemption, what is your benefit, whatever it is. So those days, these preference amounts or the preference benefits used to calculate by the third-party agencies or manual process. Because of this reason, sometimes it gets delayed, get the feedback from the third-party agencies, or there was some possibility of some kind of manual mistake. So because of this reason, since there is a requirement in the international trade to calculate the preference, okay, for the imports what you made from the same preference zones, what SAP GTS did, SAP GTS has given an application area called preference processing. So this is the reason why SAP GTS has introduced a special application area, an application area called preference processing. If you implement or if you configure preference determination. If you implement or if you configure preference determination to your client, then with the help of that preference determination, what happens? Your system can calculate the preference what you are supposed to get for each and every transaction. For each and every transaction level, the system itself can tell you what is the preference and what you are supposed to get for the import or for the import what you are making. So this is the business requirement. This is the business requirement of the business process associated with preference processing in the international trade. So Vikas, is it is that answers your question?
Yeah, Venkat. So to sum it up, maybe what preference processing is like, as you have given the example, is in the area of free trade zone. Like if there is an exporter in Canada, ABC, and if he wants to import certain material, and it will be good for him if he imports that raw material from Canada, from US or from Mexico, because
Yes.
if that's the case, then whenever that goods are imported in Canada, then that exporter is going to get some benefits out of that, which maybe some excise duties can be waived off or something like that.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Okay. So now I will explain some 1 minute. Let me find out we have something here. Okay. So now I will explain what are the different.
Pankaj, and this preference determination is only for your imports, right? That's whenever you do your
Yes.
it starts
Yes.
naturally into your sales side,
Yes.
mostly into your
Yes.
purchasing side, right?
Yes. That means there are two things. Okay, I can put it in this way. I'm going to explain that. There are two cases. So one is if you are importing, try to understand. I'm going to the map. Okay. Let us say your client is in. Let us say your client is in US. And if your client is importing, from Canada, then what we supposed to get the benefit? Try to understand. Let us say there is a company called Bell Helicopters. Based out of Texas, which is Textron Group. Bell Helicopters is the company who is doing business in the US, and they're importing some aviation products, some aviation parts or aviation products from the Canada. Then who is supposed to get the benefit?
No.
Bell Helicopters, right? Bell Helicopters is supposed to get the benefit, right? Because they are importing the materials or the aviation products from the Canada. Am I correct? Okay, is everybody clear? Bell Helicopters is the company which is based out of Texas in the United States. They are importing the raw materials from the Canada. Then is Bell Helicopters eligible for getting the benefit?
Yeah.
Why? Because the Canada is part of the North America. Okay? And in the second case, okay, let us say Bell Helicopters is not importing anything. But Bell Helicopters is exporting something to the Bell Helicopters is exporting some finished product to the client in the Canada. Bell Helicopters is exporting the products to client in Canada. Then who is supposed to get the benefit? Let us say GV Corporation. GV Corporation in Ontario, the GV Corporation or GV Aviation Corporation is getting raw materials from the from the Bell Helicopters from the US. Then who is supposed to get the benefit?
The importer is supposed to get benefit.
That means the GV Corporation is supposed to get the benefit, because these people are the people who are in Ontario, Toronto, are supposed to get the benefit, supposed to receive, they're receiving the goods from the US, which is also same preference zone. So that means there are two things. The one thing is, if your client is importing something from the sale preference zone, then your client is supposed to get the benefit. Okay? If your client is exporting something to the sale preference zone to the other person is supposed to get the benefit. So just keep it in mind. This is just for information purpose, but what I am trying to tell, you will understand little later now. Okay? So basically, there are before I explain this one, I wanted to explain something else in general. So the case one, Bell helicopter in case one, or in scenario one, Bell helicopter is receiving goods from the like is GV Aviation Corporation, or whatever it is, like I can say, so GV Aviation Corporation. So these people from the Canada are sending the goods to Bell helicopters, which is in US. Now, after or as part of import, as part of receiving the goods or as part of import, okay, if Bell Helicopters Corporation, BH Corporation, would like to get the benefit from the customs authorities, on what basis? Try to understand this point. After receiving the goods from Canada, from the Bell Helicopter people, Bell Helicopter company, after receiving the goods from the Canada, so what they are supposed to do? What kind of eligibility? They are eligible to get some kind of benefit. Am I correct? They are eligible to get some kind of benefit. Am I correct? Hello? Am I correct? Bell Helicopter is supposed to get some benefit. Am I correct? If they import, Bell Helicopter is supposed to get the benefit if they import something from the Canada. Is everybody agree with me? In the case one, if Bell Helicopter is importing something from the Canada, then in that case, Bell Helicopter is supposed to get the benefit. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So then, who will give the benefit? Who will give the benefit to Bell Helicopter?
Customs authorities of US.
Customs authorities of US. Okay? The customs authorities of US should give the benefit to the Bell Helicopters. So then, if Bell Helicopters simply saying that, if Bell Helicopters simply goes to the customs authorities and says that I am importing something, or I have imported something from the Canada, is US customs authorities okay to accept, or is it okay to the US authorities just simply based on the words or based on some kind of information? Is that okay to the US customs authorities to give the benefit, or they expect something? They do they need do?
Document evidence.
That means
Documented.
exactly. If Bell Helicopters would claim, the benefit from the US customs authorities, they need to show some evidence. They need to show some evidence, or they need to show some proof. They need to show some proof. So what is that proof? The proof is called certificate of origin. Certificate of origin. So who will give the certificate of origin to the Bell Helicopters? The GV Aviation Corporation. Whoever is the vendor sending the goods to the importer, the destination country, like that means the exporter. The exporter is supposed to provide a certificate of origin document, that is proof, the proof of vendor, the proof of that is also called in SAP GTS called vendor declaration. The certificate of origin or the vendor declaration stating that the vendor declares, the vendor who is exporting the goods to Bell Helicopters, the vendor who is exporting the goods to Bell Helicopters is supposed to provide some kind of proof to the Bell Helicopters called vendor declaration. What is this vendor declaration? This vendor declaration declares, the vendor declaration declares that the goods are originated. The vendor declaration which is given by GV Aviation from the Canada, it defines, it states that the goods are originated, the goods are manufactured, the goods are completely manufactured by the manufacturer in Canada. If the vendor provides the declaration document, based on the declaration document, the US Customs authorities will give the benefit or will give the will give the preference or will give the benefit to the BH corporation. So that means in the case one, the Bell Helicopters is supposed to receive what? They are supposed to receive vendor declaration. They are supposed to receive the vendor declaration. Is everybody clear? That means they are supposed to request the vendor declaration to their vendors. In the case one, when the Bell Helicopters, when the Bell Helicopters is importing something from the Canadian vendor, then they need to request their vendors, so can you please send me the vendor declaration? They need to request their vendors to get the vendor declaration. That is the case one. In the case two, let us say the Bell Helicopters is exporting something. Like in the case one, it is importing something. That is okay. But in the case two, the Bell Helicopters is exporting something to the customer, in the Canada. In the case one, they are receiving something, but in the case two, they are exporting something to the customer who is in the Canada, in the same preference zone. Then who needs vendor declaration? In the case two, when the Bell Helicopters is exporting something to the customer who is in Canada, okay, then who needs vendor declaration to get the benefit? Who needs vendor declaration?
The importer in Canada.
The importer in Canada. That is here in our diagram, in picture, David Associates. Because the David Associates, the customer called David Associates in Canada is getting the goods from the BH corporation. So in that case, these people need vendor declaration. Then who will issue the vendor declaration? Who has to issue the vendor declaration? Bell Helicopters, right? Okay. Am I correct? Bell Helicopters. Is everybody get it? Whenever the Bell Helicopters is importing something from the Canadian vendors, then they need to request the vendor declaration. From their vendors. But whereas in the second case, whenever the Bell Helicopters is exporting something to the customer who is in the same preference zone called David Associates, then these people need to issue the vendor declaration. So that means if a company is involving export and import activities with the same preference zone, the case like in general, if a company is involving export and import activities with the people belongs to the same preference zone, then the company need to take care of two things. The one is requesting the vendor declarations from their vendor when they are importing, and the second thing is issuing the vendor declaration or sending the vendor declaration to their customers who belongs to the same preference zone. But if company is only importing, then do we need to take care of the case 2 in the system? If your company is only doing the import, if your company is only doing the import from the same preference zone, then do you need to take care of the case 2? Hello? No, right? No. And in other words, if company is not importing anything from the same preference zone, but the company is exporting to the customer in the same preference zone, then what they need to do? They don't need to request anything. They don't need to request any vendor declaration, but what they need to do? they need to issue the vendor declaration to their customers if the customer belongs to the same preference zone. If they're exporting something to the customer, if that customer belongs to the same preference zone, then they need to send the declarations to their customers, because their customers claim those declaration to their customs authorities. Okay, that is like three different cases. The case one, the client is involving both import and export with the same preference zone people. And the case two, it may be doing only export. To the customers in the same preference zone. Or in the case three, it may be doing only import with the same preference zone. So based on this, like your work or your client responsibility will change. So here basically from the system perspective, there are two different processes. Those are managing the vendor declaration for vendor purpose, and managing the vendor declaration for the customer purpose. Managing the vendor declaration for vendor purpose, or managing the vendor declaration for the customer purpose. So when do you need to take care of managing the vendor declaration for the vendor purpose? Can anyone tell me? When do you need to take care of managing the vendor declaration for vendor purpose? So when do you need to?
In the scenario where we are.
So when the scenario where you are importing something, whenever you are importing something from a vendor from the same preference zone, then you need to take care of manage vendor declaration for vendor purpose. So why are you managing vendor declaration in the system? Because for the vendor purpose. That means since you need to receive the vendor declaration from a vendor, you manage the vendor declaration. The case one. And when do you need to take care of vendor declaration for the customer purpose? When do you need to manage vendor declaration for the customer purpose? Whenever you export something to the customer who belongs to same preference zone. When you export to the customer who belongs to the same preference zone. So that is what? There are two different things. Those are managing the vendor declaration for the vendor purpose, or managing the vendor declaration for the customer purpose. So we call them as the first one is called as LTVDs for the vendor. The second one is called as LTVDs for the customer. LTVD means long-term vendor declaration. L for long, T for term, V for vendor, D for declaration. LTVDs for the vendor. LTVDs for the vendor you are dealing with whenever you are importing something from the same preference zone vendor, and the LTVD for the customer, that is managing the vendor declaration for the customer purpose. Because your customer belongs to the same preference zone, you need to issue the declaration. You need to send the declaration. Then what you do? You have to take care of the vendor declaration for the customer. That is LTVD for the customer, LTVD for the vendor, and LTVD for the customer. Okay, and this is like the system scenario level and business process level. And tomorrow's class we will discuss about the configuration setup required and the master data settings required for this preference process. We will discuss. Actually, today I need to drop a little earlier. I have some little work to work on one of my production support issue. That's why I'm just stopping here, and we will continue to discuss tomorrow morning. Okay, tomorrow morning same time we will continue to discuss. And this recording I will be sending, since I know I'm going to wake up, I'm going to stay for some time. I can send it in a couple of hours, 1 or 2 hours. I will be sending recording now itself. Okay, thank you for participating. See you tomorrow morning in continuation to the preference determination. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vendor.
Okay, thank you.